That night, my husband threw me out in the pouring rain like a piece of trash. And on that very same night, I stumbled into a car driven by the most feared man in this city. It turned out to be the most beautiful mistake of my life. If you've ever felt like your world was falling apart, only to find a new one waiting, you need to hear this. It's a story about hitting rock bottom and finding a strength you never knew you had, in a place you never expected. This isn't just about heartbreak, it's about rebirth. Have you ever made a mistake that ended up saving you? Tell me your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell, because you won't want to miss what happens next. The storm raging outside was a perfect mirror for the chaos churning in my heart as I leaned, exhausted, against the cold brick wall of St. Anne's Children's Hospital. Rain fell like bullets fired from an angry sky, hammering the city, and reminding me with every merciless drop how my life had completely unraveled in the span of 30 minutes. The adrenaline from saving little Tommy Martinez hadn't faded yet, and my hands still trembled from the ordeal. The 8-year-old had coded twice during his emergency appendectomy, and I had spent 4 grueling hours holding his small hand while machines fought death to keep him breathing. It was another double shift, another child pulled back from the brink, and another day that Leo would dismissively label as pointless because this job just didn't pay enough. "Could you please get your priorities straight, Evelyn?" His sharp voice, even now, cut through me like a December wind. "We can't afford your savior complex anymore. I landed an offer today, a real job. But that means we need to start planning for the future, thinking about kids." Kids. The word tightened my chest again with that familiar, suffocating panic. At 28, I should have been ready. Most women my age were already mothers, gracefully balancing careers and families like the ones I saw every day with my patients. But whenever Leo brought it up, all I could see was the back of my father as he walked out on us when I was 7, leaving behind nothing but empty promises, and a mother who never truly came back to life. I'm not ready, Leo, and you know why. Don't make your childhood trauma my problem, Evelyn. You either grow up and give me what I want, or I'll find someone who will. The argument spiraled out of control from there, our voices rising until my coworkers were casting uncomfortable glances our way. Leo grabbed my arm, his fingers digging hard into the soft flesh above my elbow with a force that would surely leave a bruise. "Maybe standing in the rain for a bit will teach you to appreciate what you have at home." And then, he was gone, peeling out of the parking lot in his rusty Toyota, leaving me stranded 20 kilometers from our apartment with nothing but my purse and a thin set of scrubs utterly useless against the winter storm. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers numb with cold, intending to call a rideshare. The screen flickered once, twice, and then went completely black. Dead. Of course. "Fuck," I muttered, shoving the useless brick back into my pocket. The parking lot was nearly empty now, save for a few cars belonging to the night shift staff who wouldn't be leaving for hours. I could go back inside and ask for help, but the humiliation of explaining I'd been abandoned by my husband felt worse than freezing to death. That's when I saw it. A sleek, black sedan parked near the exit ramp, its hazard lights blinking in a rhythmic, pulsing beat against the darkness. Through the rain-streaked windshield, I could make out the blurry silhouette of a figure in the driver's seat. My ride. It had to be. The timing was too perfect for it to be anything else. I ran toward the car, my heels slapping against the wet concrete, my nursing bag bumping against my hip. The back door was unlocked and I slid inside, gasping with relief to be out of the storm, even if just for the ride home. "Thank God," I breathed, wiping the rain from my face with the back of my hand. "My phone died, and I thought you might have cancelled the trip." "My husband, who the hell are you?" The voice that interrupted me was nothing like the rideshare driver I expected. It was deep and magnetic, with a trace of an accent I couldn't quite place, maybe Italian. It was rich like dark chocolate but twice as dangerous. I looked up and the world tilted on its axis. The man in the back seat was not the driver. He was pressed against the far window, one hand clutched to his side, where a dark fluid was rapidly spreading across an expensive-looking white shirt. Even in the dim light of the dashboard, I could see the sharp planes of his face, the shadows that carved out the hollows of his cheeks. His hair was as black as the storm outside, slicked back from a forehead that bespoke both intelligence and ruthlessness. And his eyes, God, his eyes were the color of a winter sky just before a blizzard, a pale, gray blue so sharp they felt like they could see right through me to parts of myself I had long since forgotten. "I'm sorry," I stammered, my hand already reaching for the door handle. "I thought this was my car." "I'll just stay put." The command was soft but absolute. "Marcus, drive." The driver, whom I hadn't even noticed before, gave a curt nod, and the car pulled away from the curb. I was trapped between politeness and panic, unsure if I was being kidnapped or had simply stumbled into a misunderstanding. Please, I really need to get out. This was just a mistake. The stranger studied me with that unnerving gaze, his eyes sweeping over my drenched scrubs, my trembling hands, and the way I was pressed against the door like a cornered animal. Who left you out there? The question was so unexpected that the truth slipped out before I could think. My husband. He was teaching me a lesson. A dangerous glint flashed in his eyes. What kind of lesson requires leaving a woman alone in a storm? I hugged myself, suddenly aware of how pathetic I must look. The kind that's supposed to make me understand what I'll lose if I don't give him what he wants. And what does he want? A child. A family. Things I'm not ready to give him. The words tumbled out before I could stop them, 3 years of resentment from marriage counseling spilling like blood from a wound. He thinks I'm broken because I can't just snap my fingers and become the perfect wife. The man was silent for a long moment, still watching me with that unnerving focus. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, but the command was no less potent. Some lessons are more dangerous than others, Evelyn. My blood ran cold. How do you know my name? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he shifted slightly, and I caught the glint of what looked like a gun holster under his jacket. The spreading stain on his shirt was definitely blood, and from the way he held himself, the wound was serious. You're hurt, I said, my medical training overriding my fear. You need to get to a hospital. No hospitals. But you're bleeding. That looks, I said, no hospitals. The steel in his voice was non-negotiable. Marcus, home. Sir, shouldn't we drop the lady off first? No. His eyes never left mine. I think Mrs. Hayes and I have more to discuss. He knew my married name, and that fact sent a fresh wave of fear coursing through my veins. This was not a random encounter. This man, whoever he was, had been waiting for me, or at least for someone like me. Please, I whispered. I don't know what this is, but I haven't done anything wrong. I'm just a nurse. I save children's lives. That's all. Children's lives, he repeated the words thoughtfully, as if they held a special significance for him. A noble profession. Thankless, I imagine. Sometimes. My husband doesn't appreciate it. It wasn't a question, but I found myself nodding anyway. Leo thinks I should quit, find a job that pays more. Start a family instead of taking care of other people's children. Leo. There it was again, that dangerous, all-knowing recognition. The gambling debts. The money borrowed from people who are not known for their kindness. My mouth went dry. How could you possibly know about that? He smiled, a humorless twist of his lips. I make it my business to know everything about everyone in my world, Mrs. Hayes. And whether you realize it or not, you just stepped into it. The car turned onto a private road flanked by iron gates and security cameras. Through the rain-streaked window, I could see the outline of a massive mansion rising from manicured lawns like something out of a Gothic novel. Where are we going? Somewhere safe, he said. Somewhere we can continue our conversation without interruption. I have to get home. Leo will be worried. Another smile, this one more predatory than the last. I highly doubt that. But don't you worry, Evelyn. You're under my protection now. The car came to a stop in a circular driveway, and I knew with a bone-deep certainty that the life I had known up until this moment was over. The woman who had gotten into this car was gone, dissolved in the storm like rain on pavement. All that was left was to discover who I was destined to become. The interior of the mansion was a testament to a level of wealth I couldn't have imagined. As Marcus led me through a foyer large enough to contain my entire apartment, I found myself gaping at what looked like museum-quality Renaissance paintings. A crystal chandelier cast a warm glow on the polished marble floors, and the scent of fresh orchids arranged in Ming Dynasty vases filled the air with a grace I had only ever smelled in my dreams. My soaked scrubs dripped onto the floor, leaving a trail of evidence from the storm I had just escaped. Everything here whispered of power, control, and the kind of money that felt almost obscene compared to the cramped hospital rooms where I fought to save lives with outdated equipment. Evelyn, please sit. The man's voice came from behind me, and I turned to see him moving with slow, deliberate steps toward an ornate chair by a fireplace large enough to roast a whole pig. In the brighter light, I could see how pale he had become, though his composure remained unshakable. "You need medical attention," I said, my professional instincts kicking in despite the surreal surroundings. "That wound is still bleeding." "I'm aware." He settled into the chair with a practiced grace that couldn't quite mask his discomfort. "But first, we need to address your situation." "My situation is that I'm soaking wet in a stranger's house." I hugged myself, suddenly feeling how out of place I was. "I should call a cab." "With what phone?" A flicker of amusement crossed his pale eyes. "Besides, I'm hardly a stranger anymore. Allow me to introduce myself properly. Lorenzo Valenti." The name meant nothing to me. But the way he said it suggested it was supposed to. There was weight behind the syllables, a history of awe and fear I couldn't begin to comprehend. "Mr. Valenti, I appreciate you getting me out of the storm, but I really have to get home." "Back to Leo?" There was a depth to the question that unsettled me. "The man who abandoned you in a parking lot during the worst storm of the year." My cheeks burned. "My marriage isn't perfect, but that doesn't give you the right, Rosa," he called out, and a woman appeared in the doorway almost instantly. She was in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun, and eyes that saw everything. She was dressed simply but expensively, and she moved with the quiet authority of someone who ran this household with absolute efficiency. "Yes, Mr. Valenti. Please prepare the blue suite for Mrs. Hayes. She'll be staying with us tonight." "I will not." I shot to my feet, water still dripping from my hair. "I don't know what kind of person you are, but I'm not spending the night in a stranger's house." Rosa looked between us, her expression carefully neutral, waiting for her orders. Lorenzo studied me with those unsettling eyes, and I had the distinct impression he was cataloging every micro-expression on my face. "What kind of person do you think I am, Evelyn?" The question was loaded with implications I didn't want to explore. "I think you're the kind of person who knows far too much about people he's just met." "Fair enough." He reached into his pocket, making me flinch until I realized he was just getting his phone. He began typing rapidly. "Your full name is Evelyn Hayes, née Zhao. You're 28 years old, born in Portland, Oregon. Your parents died in a house fire when you were 19, leaving you with substantial medical debts you are still paying off." My blood ran cold. "How could you possibly know that? You graduated summa cum laude from Oregon Health Science University with a Bachelor of Science in Nursing. You specialized in pediatrics because you wanted to protect children the way no one protected you after your father walked out when you were 7. Stop it." My voice was barely a whisper. "You married Leo Hayes 3 years ago. He works construction when he can get it, but he has a gambling problem that has been escalating. He currently owes approximately $47,000 to various bookies and loan sharks." The room seemed to spin around me. "That's not possible. Leo wouldn't gamble that much." "Wouldn't he?" Lorenzo put down his phone, pinning me with that sharp gaze. "When was the last time you looked at your joint bank account, Evelyn?" I opened my mouth to answer and found that I couldn't. "Leo handled all our finances. He said it was easier that way, that I had enough stress at work without worrying about bills and budgets. I had trusted him because trusting him was easier than facing the possibility that I had married yet another man who would abandon me when things got hard." "You've been investigating me." The words came out as an accusation, but underneath the anger was a bone-deep fear. "Why?" "I investigate everyone who enters my world." Lorenzo's expression remained neutral, but there was something almost gentle in his tone. "And you, whether you realized it or not, entered my world the moment you got in that car." I made a mistake. "I thought you were my rideshare." "There are no mistakes in my business. Only opportunities and consequences." He gestured to Rosa, who had remained silent throughout the exchange. "The blue suite, please. And have Marcus bring Mrs. Hayes' things from the car." "I don't have any things," I protested. "Just my purse and the bag in the back. The one you brought from the hospital. Your medical kit." In all the chaos, I had forgotten I was still carrying my emergency supplies. Some nurses left their kits at work, but I had learned to keep the essentials with me after too many emergencies where seconds counted. "You really need medical attention," I said, looking at the spreading stain on his shirt. "Let me help you." "Why?" The question seemed genuine. "You don't know me. For all you know, I could be dangerous." "Are you dangerous?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Extremely. Then why would you help me? Why not just dump me somewhere and go about your business? Because, Evelyn, he said, rising carefully from his chair, your husband's debts have made you a person of interest to some very unsavory people. Whether you know it or not, you're already in danger. The words hit me like a physical blow. What kind of danger? The kind that doesn't ask for repayment politely. Lorenzo moved closer, and I could smell his cologne, an expensive, masculine scent that made my pulse quicken in a way I didn't want to examine. The kind that uses family members to encourage prompt payment. You're scaring me. I'm saving your life. His voice was low, almost a whisper. Your husband borrowed money from men who consider broken kneecaps a reasonable collection tactic. Do you think they'd stop at using a pretty nurse to motivate him? My knees suddenly felt weak. I sank back into the chair, my mind reeling with possibilities I had been too naive to ever consider. All those late nights Leo claimed to be working overtime, all those mysterious phone calls he took in the other room, all the times he had been vague about money, about bills, about why we never seemed to be able to get ahead even with both of us working full-time. How much does he owe? I asked. More than he can pay back. Lorenzo's expression was almost sympathetic. More than he can ever pay back without help. And you're offering to help. There had to be a catch. A man like Lorenzo Valenti didn't help people out of the goodness of his heart. I'm offering you protection. He held out his hand to me. Come. Let's deal with this wound, and then we'll talk terms. Terms. I stared at his outstretched hand, knowing that taking it would change everything. Protection isn't free, Evelyn. But I promise you, the price I ask will be far more reasonable than the one Leo's creditors will demand. I looked up into those pale eyes and saw something that scared me more than any threat: genuine concern. This man, this stranger who knew the intimate details of my life, seemed to actually care what happened to me. And against every instinct that screamed at me to run, I placed my hand in his. His fingers closed around mine with a surprising gentleness. After we're done, Rosa will show you to your room. You're safe here. Safe. The word felt foreign on my tongue. A concept I had long forgotten, somewhere between my father's abandonment and Leo's growing desperation. For the first time in years, I almost believed it could be true. The blue suite Rosa had prepared for me was larger than the apartment I shared with Leo. Egyptian cotton sheets covered a king-sized bed that could have comfortably slept four, and the floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over landscaped gardens that were beautiful even in the harshness of winter. The marble bathroom was stocked with toiletries I had only ever seen in luxury hotel magazines, and a walk-in closet was filled with clothes that were exactly my size. I was standing in front of that closet now, my fingertips brushing against fabrics that cost more than my monthly salary. Silk blouses, cashmere sweaters, designer jeans that had never seen the inside of a discount store. Everything fit perfectly, as if Lorenzo had somehow known my measurements down to the last inch. The realization sent another shiver down my spine. How long had he been watching me? How much did he know about my routines, my preferences, the life I shared with Leo? I had spent 2 hours patching up Lorenzo's wound after I had agreed to stay. The bullet had passed cleanly through his side, missing vital organs by inches. He had remained perfectly still while I cleaned and stitched the wound, watching my face with those unnerving pale eyes. His tolerance for pain was extraordinary. Most men would have been writhing, or at least gripping something for support. But Lorenzo had simply observed me work, as if I were performing a routine medical procedure, instead of battlefield surgery in his living room. You have steady hands, he had said as I tied off the last stitch. I work with children. Steady hands are a requirement. But you're still shaking. I was shaking. Not from the procedure I could suture a wound in my sleep, but from the growing realization that Lorenzo Valenti was unlike any man I had ever met. There was a predatory stillness about him, a dangerous quality in the way he seemed to anticipate my every move. Now, dressed in borrowed clothes that felt like they had been made for me, I tried to process the conversation we had had afterward. With a calm that was both cool and terrifying, Lorenzo had explained exactly how deep Leo's gambling debts went. It wasn't just the $47,000 he had mentioned, but additional loans from increasingly dangerous sources, people who didn't accept payment plans or listen to sob stories about sick children and medical bills. Your husband owes money to Viktor Petrov, Lorenzo had said as I cleaned my instruments, him back in his chair. Have you heard the name? I had shaken my head, though the name sent a prickle of unease across my skin. Petrov controls the Russian element in this city. Unlike the more traditional organizations, his men don't believe in gradual escalation. They prefer to make examples of people to discourage future trouble. What kind of examples? The kind that leave behind widows and orphans. The memory made my hands tremble now as I selected a cream-colored sweater from the closet. Everything about this screamed danger. And yet, I felt safer here than I had in my own home in months. When had I started feeling unsafe in my own marriage? When had Leo's increasingly erratic behavior become my new normal? Lorenzo had given me a new phone after my old one died. It vibrated now with an incoming call. Leo's number flashed on the screen, and my stomach clenched with familiar anxiety. Hello. Where the hell are you? His voice was a mixture of panic and anger. I came home and you weren't here. Your phone's been going straight to voicemail. My phone died. I'm staying somewhere safe tonight. Safe? What's that supposed to mean? Safe from what? The question hung between us, loaded with unspoken implications. How could I tell him I knew about his debts, about the men he had borrowed from, about the fact that my life was likely in danger because of his choices? Safe from another argument, I said instead. About kids, about priorities, about why I'm never good enough the way I am. Evelyn, come home. We can talk about this. Can we? Or will you just tell me again that my job doesn't matter? That saving children's lives isn't as important as having them? There was a long silence. When Leo spoke again, his voice had that pleading quality of desperation I had learned to recognize. I got a new job offer today. A lot of money. We could afford kids, a house. What kind of job pays that well with no experience or qualifications? Another pause. Longer this time. It's legit, Evelyn. I promise. Just like your gambling was legit. Just like those phone calls you took in the other room were legit. I don't know what you're talking about. The lie came so easily. I wondered how many others he had told me over the years. How many times I had accepted his explanations without question because believing him was easier than facing the truth. I can't do this anymore, Leo. I can't pretend everything is okay when it's not. Where are you? I'll come get you. No. The word came out sharper than I intended. I need time to think. Think about what? We're married, Evelyn. You can't just disappear. You're the one who left me in a parking lot in a storm. If anyone disappeared first, it was you. I hung up before he could respond, my hand trembling with adrenaline and something that might have been relief. For the first time in years, I had stood up to Leo without apologizing, without backing down. A soft knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. Come in. Lorenzo entered, moving with a fluid grace that was only slightly hampered by his freshly treated wound. He had changed into a pair of dark jeans and a black sweater that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and his lean, powerful build. In the better light, I could see he was younger than I had first thought, maybe mid-30s, with the kind of masculine beauty that belonged on a Renaissance sculpture. How are you feeling? I asked, noting the color that had returned to his cheeks. Better, thank you. His eyes swept over my attire, lingering on the way the borrowed clothes fit my frame. The clothes suit you. How did you know my size? I have an excellent eye for measurements. There was an almost playful quality to his tone, though his expression remained serious. Your husband called. It wasn't a question, and I didn't bother to pretend. He wants me to come home. I told him I needed time to think. Lorenzo moved closer, and I caught that scent of his cologne again. Cedar and leather with a deeper, more dangerous undertone. What are you thinking about? About whether my marriage was over before tonight, or if I'm just finally admitting it to myself. Marriage is supposed to be a partnership, he said softly. Protection, loyalty, a sharing of burdens. Not abandonment when things get hard. Speaking from experience. Something flickered in his pale eyes. Sadness, perhaps, or regret. My parents were married for 30 years before they died. They faced everything together, even when my father's business put the family in jeopardy. That's what love looks like, Evelyn. Not what you and Leo have. Your father's business. I studied his face, noting the careful way he chose his words. What kind of business? The kind that requires careful planning and absolute loyalty. Lorenzo's expression grew distant. They were killed when I was 15. A car bomb meant for my father, but they were together that night. Always together. The pain in his voice was so raw, so unguarded, that it made my chest ache for him. I'm sorry. Everything I have now, I built from nothing. Every dollar I've earned, every alliance I've forged, every moment of security I've created has come from my understanding that family is the only thing that matters in this world. So that's what you do. You build security. His smile was as sharp as a blade. I build empires, Evelyn. Security is just a side effect. The word should have terrified me. Instead, I found myself drawn to the confidence in his voice. The absolute certainty that he could protect what was his. When was the last time anyone had made me feel like I was something worth protecting? The gates are locked, I said, testing the boundaries of my situation. For your protection. Am I a prisoner? You are a guest in a dangerous situation. There's a difference. Lorenzo moved closer still, so close I could feel the heat radiating from his body. But I won't lie to you, Evelyn. Leaving now would be extremely unwise. The admission sent a jolt of heat through my lower belly. It wasn't fear, but something far more dangerous. This man who knew everything about my life, who commanded both loyalty and fear, was offering me something Leo never had: protection, without strings or expectations. What happens tomorrow? I asked. Tomorrow we discuss your future. Tonight you rest for the first time in months. He was right. I couldn't remember the last time I had gone to sleep without worrying about money, about Leo's moods, about whether I would wake up to face another crisis alone. Thank you, I whispered. Lorenzo reached out and touched my face, his thumb tracing the line of my cheekbone with unexpected gentleness. Sleep well, Evelyn. Tomorrow, everything changes. The photograph was delivered at 7 in the morning, slipped under my door while I was still tangled in Egyptian cotton sheets that smelled faintly of lavender. I had slept better than I had in months, wrapped in a luxury and a sense of safety I had forgotten could exist. And that photograph, it shattered the piece like glass on stone. Leo's face stared back at me from the glossy paper. But this wasn't the man I had married 3 years ago. This Leo was bruised and bloodied, his mouth covered with duct tape, his eyes wide with stark terror. Someone had written across the bottom of the photo in red ink, "The nurse for the husband. 1 hour, or he dies slowly." My hand was shaking so badly I could barely hold the picture. This couldn't be real. This didn't happen to people like me. I was a pediatric nurse who saved children's lives and went home to a modest apartment. I was not the kind of person who received ransom notes written in what looked like blood. But the evidence was undeniable. Leo was in the hands of people who dealt in violence. And I, somehow, was a pawn in a game I didn't understand. I threw on the first clothes I could find, yesterday's jeans and sweater, and ran barefoot through the halls of the mansion, my footsteps silent on the polished marble. I had memorized the route to Lorenzo's study last night, committing every turn to memory in case I needed to escape. Now I was running toward the danger, not away from it. The door to the study was already open when I arrived, and I burst in, breathless, clutching the photo like a lifeline. Lorenzo was standing behind his massive desk, speaking in fluent Italian with Marcus and 2 other men I didn't recognize. All 4 heads turned as I burst through the door. "They have Leo," I said without preamble, holding up the photo. "Someone has my husband." Lorenzo's expression didn't change, but a dangerous light flickered in his pale eyes. He motioned for the other men to leave, then rounded the desk and took the photo from my trembling hand. "Viktor Petrov," he said after a moment, studying the image. "This is his work. The Russian you told me about." My voice sounded hollow and distant. "The one Leo owed money to." "Among others," Lorenzo said, setting the photo aside and pinning me with his sharp gaze. "When did this arrive?" "Just now. Under my door." I hugged myself, a sudden chill running through me despite the warmth of the room. "They want to trade me for him. 1 hour. That's not going to happen." The certainty in his voice should have been comforting. Instead, it only amplified my panic. "You don't understand. They'll kill him if I don't go. They'll kill you both if you do." Lorenzo moved closer, his presence both menacing and reassuring. "This isn't about money anymore, Evelyn. It's about sending a message. What kind of message? That no one takes what's mine without paying a price. The possessive pronoun hit me like a physical blow. I'm not yours. Aren't you? His voice was low, almost a whisper. You're wearing my clothes, sleeping in my house, under my protection. You've seen me vulnerable, touched my blood. In my world, that creates a bond not easily broken. I'm married to another man. A man who gambled away your future and put your life in danger. Lorenzo reached out and touched my face, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw. A man who threw you out in a storm because you weren't ready to give him a child he wasn't prepared to raise. The gentle touch sent a jolt through my system that I didn't want to examine. This was wrong. I was married and I was scared, and I was caught between two dangerous men who both seemed to think they had a claim on my life. Yet, Lorenzo's proximity made it almost impossible to think straight. We have to help him, I insisted. No matter what you think of him. He doesn't deserve to die over a gambling debt. And what do you deserve, Evelyn? Lorenzo's hand moved to the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my hair. When do you get to choose your own life, instead of cleaning up someone else's mess? The question cut deeper than I expected. When had I stopped making decisions for myself? When had my entire existence become about managing Leo's problems, working extra shifts to cover his losses, pretending our marriage wasn't slowly suffocating me? I made my choice when I said my vows. Vows to a man who has broken every promise he ever made to you. Lorenzo moved closer still, so close I could see the flecks of silver in his pale eyes. Vows to a man who would trade your safety for his own convenience. You don't know him like I do. I know he's never looked at you the way I'm looking at you right now. The words hung between us, heavy with implications I didn't want to face. Lorenzo was right. Leo had never looked at me like I was something precious, something irreplaceable, something worth protecting at all costs. Even at the beginning, his attention had felt casual, distracted, as if I were a pleasant accessory to his real life, not the center of it. But this man, this dangerous stranger who commanded empires and inspired fear, looked at me like I was the most important thing in his world. The Russians won't negotiate, Lorenzo continued, his voice soft but unyielding. This photo is theater. They've already decided Leo's fate. Then we have to try something else. Desperation made my voice crack. There has to be another way. There is. His thumb brushed against my lower lip, and despite the gravity of our situation, I felt a jolt of heat deep in my belly. But it requires you to trust me. Completely. What are you asking? Let me handle Viktor Petrov. Let me protect what's mine. And Leo will face the consequences of his own choices. Lorenzo's expression hardened. As will everyone who thinks they can take from me without paying a price. Before I could respond, gunfire erupted somewhere in the house. Not the clean crack of a handgun, but the rapid-fire stutter of automatic weapons. Lorenzo moved instantly, shoving me behind the desk and drawing his own gun with a practiced speed. Get down, he commanded, moving toward the window with a fluid grace that belied his recent injury. More gunfire. Closer. Shouts in multiple languages. The sound of shattering glass from somewhere downstairs. They're here, Lorenzo said grimly. Victor decided not to wait for your RSVP. What are we going to do? Survive. He was already moving toward a panel of the wall I hadn't noticed before. It slid open to reveal a hidden passageway. There's a safe room behind the wine cellar. Marcus willed the door to the study imploded inward in a spray of splinters, and armed men in tactical gear poured into the room. Lorenzo turned and fired twice, dropping the first two intruders before diving for cover behind a leather armchair. I pressed myself to the floor behind the desk, my heart hammering so fast I thought it might burst. This wasn't my world. I saved children in sterile hospital rooms, not gunfights and mansions. The smell of cordite and blood filled the air, mixed with shouts in Russian and Italian. Evelyn. Lorenzo's voice cut through the chaos. The passage, now. I started crawling toward the hidden door, keeping low as bullets shattered priceless art, and embedded themselves in walls that had likely stood for generations. The sound was deafening, overwhelming, like being trapped in a thunderstorm made of violence. A hand grabbed my ankle, yanking me backward. I screamed and kicked out, connecting with something soft that made my attacker grunt in pain. I rolled over to find myself face to face with a man who looked like the stereotype of a Russian thug. blonde, scarred, with cold blue eyes that held no warmth or pity. "The pretty little nurse," he said in accented English. "Victor has plans for you." I clawed at his face, my nails finding purchase in his cheek and drawing blood. He swore and raised his hand to strike me. The gunshot was deafening. The Russian's head snapped back, and he collapsed onto the Persian rug beside me, his blood spattering everywhere. Lorenzo was standing over us, smoke still curling from the barrel of his gun, his pale eyes burning with a fury that made him look less like a man and more like an avenging angel. "No one touches what's mine," he said, holding out his hand to me. I took it without hesitation, letting him pull me to my feet. And in that moment, with death all around us and violence painting the air red, I realized something that should have terrified me. I wanted to belong to Lorenzo Valenti more than I wanted to breathe. "Come," he said, guiding me toward the hidden passage. "We have work to do." As we disappeared into the darkness behind the wall, leaving the sounds of the battle behind, I knew that whatever happened next would determine not only whether I lived or died, but who I would become if I survived. The woman who entered that passage was not the one who had gotten into Lorenzo's car just 24 hours earlier. That Evelyn had been a victim, a woman who accepted abandonment and betrayal as the price of love. This Evelyn was someone else entirely. Someone who might just be worth fighting for. After all, the safe room beneath Lorenzo's mansion was a marvel of paranoid engineering. Reinforced steel walls and independent air supply, enough food and water for 2 weeks, and communications equipment that could reach anywhere in the world. I sat in stunned silence on a leather sofa that probably cost more than my yearly salary, watching as Lorenzo coordinated his response to the attack via encrypted phones and video surveillance. Leo was alive. Cameras positioned around the estate had captured Viktor Petrov's men dragging him from a black van just before the firefight began. He was bruised and terrified, but he was breathing. That should have been my only concern. And yet, I found myself mesmerized by the man pacing the small space like a caged predator, his movements fluid despite the wound I had dressed just hours before. "How long have you been planning this?" I asked when he finally ended his latest call. Lorenzo stopped pacing, his pale eyes pinning me with that unsettling focus I was beginning to recognize. "Planning what?" "Leo's debt. The Russians. Me showing up in your car." I stood up, a sudden surge of anger overwhelming my fear. "None of this was a coincidence, was it? You think I orchestrated your husband's gambling addiction?" There was genuine curiosity in his voice, as if my accusation amused rather than offended him. "I think you're the kind of man who manipulates situations to get what he wants." I crossed my arms, trying for a confidence I didn't feel. "And for some reason, you wanted me." "Very perceptive." Lorenzo put down his phone, giving me his full attention. "You're right, of course. But not in the way you think." "Then explain it to me." He was silent for a long moment, studying my face as if committing every micro-expression to memory. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight I hadn't heard before, a note that might have been regret. "I've been watching Leo for 6 months. Not because of his debts, but because of his connection to you." Lorenzo moved closer, and I fought the urge to step back. "Your husband wasn't just gambling, Evelyn. He was laundering money for Viktor Petrov." The words hit me like a physical blow. "That's not possible." "Isn't it? All those construction jobs paid in cash, the mysterious phone calls, the way money would suddenly appear and just as catastrophically vanish." Lorenzo's expression was almost sympathetic. Leo was cleaning Russian funds through a network of legitimate-looking businesses. The gambling debts were a cover for what he was really doing. My knees suddenly felt weak. I sank back onto the sofa, my mind reeling with possibilities I had been too naive to see. He was working for them. With them. Leo was what we call a useful idiot, a man engaged in criminal activity without understanding the full scope of it. Lorenzo sat beside me, so close I could smell his cologne. But useful idiots become liabilities when they start asking questions or getting greedy. So Viktor decided to cut him loose. Viktor decided to use him as bait. Leo's real value wasn't his money laundering skills. It was his access to you. I stared at Lorenzo, feeling the pieces of a puzzle fall into place with sickening clarity. "Me? Why would anyone want access to me?" "Because you work at St. Anne's Children's Hospital. Because you have access to medical records, patient information, surgical schedules." Lorenzo's voice dropped to a near whisper. Because several of my associates have children who are treated there, and their medical information would be priceless to my enemies. The scale of the conspiracy was breathtaking. You think they wanted me to spy on your men's children? I think they wanted to use you as leverage against me. Information about when certain patients were most vulnerable, when security was at its thinnest. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. Victor has been trying to find a weakness in my organization for years. What better way than through an innocent nurse who doesn't even know she's being used? But I've never given anyone information about a patient. I never would. I know. His voice was surprisingly gentle. That's why I intervened. How? But even as I asked the question, I was beginning to understand. You manipulated his debts. Made sure he owed more than he could possibly pay back. I encouraged a weakness that was already there. Yes. Made sure his gambling losses accelerated to the point where Victor would be forced to make a move. Lorenzo didn't look away from my accusing gaze. I needed Victor to show his hand before he could successfully recruit you. The betrayal cut deeper than I expected. It wasn't just Leo's lies but Lorenzo's manipulation. You used me as bait. I used you as bait to protect you. He reached for my hand but stopped when I flinched. If Victor had approached you gradually, gained your trust, convinced you that helping him would save your marriage or pay your bills, would you have refused? The honest answer terrified me. 3 months ago, desperate and exhausted, I might have been susceptible to that kind of manipulation. You don't know that. Don't I? Lorenzo's pale eyes seemed to see right through me. You've been cleaning up Leo's messes for 3 years. Working extra shifts to cover his losses. Pretending your marriage wasn't slowly killing you because leaving seemed harder than staying. Every word was a precision strike against the defenses I had spent years building. That doesn't give you the right to manipulate my entire life. No, he agreed softly. It doesn't. But it does give me the responsibility to protect you from men who would destroy you without a second thought. By destroying my husband. By giving you a chance to see Leo for who he really is, before it was too late. Lorenzo stood up and moved to one of the monitors, where grainy security footage showed Victor's men setting up a perimeter around the mansion. The question now is what you want to do with that information. I stared at his back, my emotions warring within me like conflicting storms. Anger at his manipulation, fear for Leo's safety, and underneath it all, a terrifying sense of gratitude that someone was finally telling me the truth about my marriage. What are my options? You can continue to pretend that Leo is worth saving. Go home, clean up this mess. Spend the rest of your life wondering when the next crisis will hit. Lorenzo turned to face me, and for a moment, I saw a flash of vulnerability in his expression. Or you can accept that some situations can't be fixed, only escaped. And if I choose to escape, then you stay here, under my protection. We figure this out together. We build something better than what you're leaving behind. The offer hung between us like a bridge across dangerous waters. To cross it meant giving up everything I thought I wanted, everything I had tried to build with Leo. But to stay on this side meant returning to a life that had been slowly killing me for years. I need to know he's safe first, I said finally. Lorenzo nodded, as if he had expected it. We'll get him back. But Evelyn, he paused, searching for the right words, don't confuse rescue with reconciliation. Some bridges are meant to burn, and trying to rebuild them only leads to more destruction. The gunfire from upstairs had stopped, replaced by muted voices and footsteps. Lorenzo's men were retaking control. Soon, we would have to leave this underground sanctuary and face what came next. I thought of Leo, terrified and battered in Victor's hands. I thought of 3 years of a marriage built on lies and manipulation. I thought of the woman who had gotten into Lorenzo's car 2 days ago, and the woman I was becoming in this reinforced concrete room, beneath the mansion of a man who collected empires the way other men collected art. When this is over, I said softly, I want the truth. All of it. No more manipulation. No more protection through deception. And what if the truth is uglier than the lies? I met his pale gaze without flinching. Then at least I'll know what I'm choosing. Lorenzo smiled, the first genuinely warm expression I had seen from him. In that case, Evelyn, I think you're going to be very dangerous indeed. A new message pinged on the communications console. Lorenzo checked the screen, his expression shifting back to the mask of controlled violence I was beginning to recognize. What is it? I asked. Victor wants to negotiate. He's offering Leo for you. Neutral ground, in 1 hour. And I think it's time Viktor Petrov learned that no one takes what's mine. Lorenzo's smile turned predatory. Ready to see how a war ends, Evelyn? And despite everything, the fear, the betrayal, the complete appending of everything I thought I knew about my life, I found myself nodding. I was ready. The air in the abandoned warehouse Victor had chosen for the meet was thick with the smell of rust and decay. Pale winter sunlight streamed through broken windows, illuminating motes of dust that floated like dying stars. I stood behind a concrete pillar, my heart hammering against my ribs, watching as the most dangerous man in the city set the stage for a war. Lorenzo's plan was nothing short of insane. Instead of negotiation or a traditional rescue, he had decided to use Victor's trap as an opportunity to end the conflict between them for good. Leo was the bait, Victor was the target, and I, somehow, was the key to destroying them both. Remember, Lorenzo had said as we drove through the empty industrial district toward this moment of reckoning, Victor believes you're an innocent pawn caught between forces you don't understand. Let him keep believing that until it's too late. Now, watching Viktor Petrov step out of the shadows with Leo stumbling beside him, duct tape over his mouth and his hands bound behind his back, his eyes wide with terror, I wondered if I was as innocent as everyone believed. The woman who had gotten into Lorenzo's car 3 days ago would never have agreed to this. She would have pleaded for a peaceful resolution, offered herself in exchange for her husband's safety, chosen martyrdom over violence. But that woman had died somewhere between discovering Leo's betrayal and feeling the touch of Lorenzo's hands. What was left was someone harder, more calculating, a woman who understood that mercy was a luxury she could no longer afford. Evelyn, Victor called out, his accented voice echoing off the warehouse walls. Come out, little nurse. It's time to collect your husband. I stepped into the open space between the pillars, my hands raised to show I was unarmed. Victor was everything Lorenzo had described, tall, lean, with a pale handsomeness that turned predatory under scrutiny. His smile reminded me of winter, beautiful and lethal. There she is, he said, gesturing for his men to spread out in a loose semicircle. The woman worth all this trouble. Leo's eyes found mine over the tape on his mouth. I saw the relief in them, the hope, the absolute conviction that I would save him from this just as I had saved him from everything else for the past 3 years. The weight of that expectation should have crushed me. Instead, all I felt was a cold assessment of the situation. Let him go, I said, proud that my voice didn't tremble. You have what you want. Do I? Victor moved closer, dragging Leo with him. I wanted a weakness in Lorenzo Valenti. As it turns out, I'm beginning to wonder if you're more dangerous than you are valuable. I'm a pediatric nurse. The only danger I pose to your men is their tetanus shot. Victor laughed, a sound like shattering glass. Humor. I like that in a woman. Tell me, Evelyn, what do you know about your husband's business arrangements? I know he's a gambler who makes bad decisions. I kept my voice even, matter of fact. I know he borrowed money he couldn't pay back. And that's all. What else is there? Victor studied my face, searching for signs of deception. Behind him, I could see Lorenzo's men moving like shadows through the upper levels of the warehouse. Marcus was crouched behind an overturned shipping container, his rifle trained on Victor's position. 2 other men were flanking the Russians from the east, waiting for Lorenzo's signal. Your husband was laundering money for my organization, Victor said finally. Quite successfully, until his gambling problem made him unreliable. I let a look of shock cross my face, widening my eyes and taking a small step back. Money laundering? Leo wouldn't know the first thing about that. Wouldn't he? Then how do you explain the $47,000 in cash we found in your apartment? My blood actually ran cold at that. There was money hidden in our home, and I had known nothing about it. How many other secrets had Leo kept from me? How many other lies had I accepted without question? I don't know. Of course you don't. Victor's smile widened. Lorenzo chose well when he decided to claim you. A woman who only sees what she wants to see, who doesn't ask difficult questions, who cleans up messes without complaint. Perfect for a man in his position. Lorenzo didn't claim me. I'm married to Leo. You're married to a man who offered you up as collateral. A man who traded information from your hospital to pay off his debts. Victor gestured to Leo, whose expression had shifted from hopeful to ashamed. Did you know your husband provided the surgical schedules for the children of 3 of Lorenzo's top associates? Surgery dates, recovery times, visitation hours. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Leo hadn't just been laundering money. He had been trading in information that could have gotten children killed. Children I might have treated, whose hands I might have held as they faced surgery, whom I might have comforted when they cried for their parents. "You're lying," I whispered. But even as I said it, I knew he wasn't. "Ask him yourself." Victor ripped the tape from Leo's mouth, making him cry out in pain. "Evelyn," Leo's voice was hoarse and desperate. "I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. They said they just needed schedules, harmless information. I didn't know they were planning to hurt anyone. You gave them the medical information of children." My voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "I was in debt. Bad debt. These men don't take payment plans." Leo's eyes filled with tears. "I thought if I did them a small favor, they would forgive what I owed." "A small favor." I repeated the words as if they were a foreign language. "The surgical schedule of a child is a small favor. Nothing happened. No one got hurt. Because Lorenzo stopped you." The pieces were clicking into place now, forming a picture so ugly I could barely comprehend it. "He found out what you were doing and made sure Victor couldn't use the information." Victor's smile had stiffened slightly. He had expected my shock to translate into forgiveness, or at least sympathy for my husband. Instead, I was looking at Leo as if he were something toxic I had accidentally touched. "Evelyn, please," Leo begged. "I love you. I know I made a mistake, but we can fix this. We can start over." "Start over?" I laughed, a strange sound in the cavernous warehouse. "You mean like we started over after the gambling? Or after you lied about working late, or after you left me in a storm because I wouldn't give you a child? The children you might have put in danger." "I would never hurt a child." "You already did. The moment you traded their information, you hurt every child in that hospital." I took a step closer, and Leo actually flinched. "How much did you get for each schedule, Leo? What's the going rate for the recovery time of a 10-year-old? Victor watched the exchange with growing unease. This was not how interrogations were supposed to go. The victim was supposed to forgive their loved one, not systematically destroy them with cold logic. "Enough," he said, raising his weapon. "This is touching. But I have business to attend to. Evelyn, you come with me. Your husband stays here as insurance against Lorenzo's retaliation." "No," I said simply. "No?" Victor's eyebrows shot up. "I don't think you understand your position here." "I understand it perfectly." I looked him directly in his pale eyes, letting him see the calculation there. "You need me alive to control Lorenzo, but you need Leo alive to control me. Which means, neither of you has the power you think you have." And that's when Lorenzo stepped out of the shadows behind Victor, the barrel of his gun pressed against the Russian's skull. "Actually," Lorenzo said conversationally, "I have all the power I need." Victor's men turned at the sound of his voice, only to find themselves facing the raised barrels of Lorenzo's soldiers' rifles. Marcus alone had 3 different angles covered, and I could see at least 5 other weapons aimed at the Russians from various hiding spots around the warehouse. "Evelyn," Lorenzo continued, his eyes never leaving Victor, "step away from your husband." I obeyed without hesitation, moving with a steady pace toward Lorenzo's position. The moment I was clear, Marcus's first shot took out Victor's second in command. The man went down like a stone, his blood spreading across the concrete. "Now," Lorenzo said, pressing the gun harder against Victor's skull. "Let's discuss the terms of your surrender." But Victor was laughing, even with a gun to his head. "You think you've won? You think this ends with you killing me? I think killing you sends a message to anyone else who might consider coming after what's mine." "And what about him?" Victor nodded toward Leo, who was now openly sobbing. "What message does keeping him alive send?" Lorenzo's pale eyes shifted to me, asking a question he couldn't speak in front of Victor. What did I want him to do with the man who had betrayed not only me, but the children under my professional care? I looked at Leo, really looked at him, and saw not the man I had married, but a weak, selfish stranger, a man who had valued money over innocent lives, a man who had used my compassion as a shield for his cowardice, a man who would do it all again if given the chance because that was, fundamentally, who he was. "Leo made his choice," I said softly. Now he lives with the consequences. Lorenzo's smile was as sharp as the winter wind. You heard the lady, Victor. Some bridges are meant to burn. The gunshot that followed was surprisingly quiet in the vast space of the warehouse. Viktor Petrov slumped to the floor, his war with the Valenti family finally over. Leo screamed from where he was bound, but I felt nothing as I watched the man who had threatened children bleed out on the concrete. This was justice, not murder. It was protection, not violence. It was the moment I stopped being Evelyn and became something else entirely. Lorenzo holstered his weapon and turned to me, searching my face for signs of shock or regret. What he found was acceptance, resolve, and something that might have been relief. There's no going back from this, he said softly. Good, I replied, and I meant it. The war came to the city in unmarked vans and midnight explosions. In the 3 weeks following Victor's death, his lieutenants scurried out of hiding like roaches startled by a sudden light. They wanted blood, Lorenzo's blood, and they were willing to burn half the city to get it. I watched the violence unfold on the streets from the safety of Lorenzo's fortified penthouse, black SUVs patrolling like mechanical predators. The news called it a gang war, a territorial dispute between organized crime families. They had no idea they were witnessing the death throes of an empire built on the suffering of children. Dmitry Koslov has taken over Victor's operation, Lorenzo said, studying surveillance feeds on multiple screens. He's more pragmatic than his predecessor, but also more ruthless. And Leo? I asked, though I wasn't sure it mattered anymore. Being held in a medical facility in the East End. Koslov is using him as insurance, in case negotiations become necessary. 3 weeks ago, the mention of Leo's captivity would have sent me into a panic. Now I felt only a cold calculation. Leo had made his choice, trading the safety of children for gambling money, betraying me with the same casual carelessness he had shown throughout our marriage. Whatever was happening to him now was nothing more than karmic justice. They'll kill him eventually, I said, stating it as a fact. Yes. Lorenzo turned from the monitors, his pale eyes studying my face. Does that bother you? It should. I moved to the window overlooking the city, watching a plume of smoke rise from a warehouse district where another Russian outpost had just been neutralized. A week ago, it would have destroyed me. Now I can barely remember why I ever thought he was worth saving. Guilt is a luxury we can't afford in wartime. Is that what this is? A war. This is an extermination. Lorenzo came to stand beside me at the window, his presence warm and solid. Victor's organization is a cancer. It's not enough to cut out the tumor. You have to eradicate every malignant cell, or it will spread. The analogy was fitting. As a nurse, I had seen too many children die from diseases that seemed to be under control, only to metastasize without warning. Sometimes aggressive treatment was the only option, even if it looked cruel to outsiders. I want to help, I said softly. Lorenzo went still beside me. How? You said they're holding Leo in a medical facility. I know medical facilities better than any of your men. I turned to meet his gaze, letting him see the resolve there. I know how to get inside, how to move through them without being noticed, how to access areas where an outsider would be spotted immediately. Evelyn, they're using patients as human shields, I continued, anger making my voice rise. Patients who need care, who trust that facility to keep them safe. That makes this personal. It's too dangerous. More dangerous than leaving Leo alive to testify against you. More dangerous than letting Koslov think he has leverage. I took a step closer, close enough to smell Lorenzo's cologne, to see the flecks of silver in his pale eyes. I'm already in this war, Lorenzo. Let me fight, not just hide. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, his hand came up slowly and touched my face, his thumb tracing the line of my cheekbone with an impossibly gentle motion. If anything happened to you, it won't. I'm more valuable alive, remember? And too dangerous to be trifled with. I leaned into his touch, feeling the calluses on his fingertips, the power he held in barely restrained check. Besides, I'll have the best backup in the city. My men don't know medical protocols, hospital security, staff rotations, patient privacy laws. Then it's a good thing they'll have a guide. Lorenzo was silent for another long moment. When he spoke, his voice held the weight of absolute command. No unnecessary risks. You report to me. You follow my orders without question. If I tell you to run, you run. Understood. And, Evelyn. The hand cupping my face tightened almost imperceptibly. If we do this, there's no turning back. You'll cross a line you can't uncross. I thought of the surgical schedules of the children Leo had sold. Of the trust he had betrayed. Of the woman I had been, who cleaned up messes but never asked why they were being made in the first place. That woman was gone, dissolved in the rain on a December night that felt like a lifetime ago. Good, I said. I'm tired of being a spectator. The medical facility where Kozlov was holding Leo took up an entire city block, a sprawling complex of interconnected buildings that had grown organically over decades. It was perfect for hiding a prisoner in plain sight, and a nightmare for anyone attempting a rescue without inside intelligence. I walked through the main entrance at 11 p.m., dressed in scrubs I had borrowed from my apartment, carrying a forged ID that identified me as Evelyn Martinez, a traveling nurse called in to help with the night shift. Lorenzo's people had done their homework. Evelyn Martinez was a real person, currently on vacation in Aruba, with an impeccable work history and credentials. The security guard barely glanced at my ID before waving me through. Medical facilities were notoriously understaffed and overworked. Temps were common, and new faces rarely drew attention. I knew from Lorenzo's surveillance that Leo was being held in a private room on the 4th floor, the psychiatric wing, where visitors were restricted, and the security cameras had convenient blind spots. Getting there required navigating a maze of hallways I had memorized from a stolen floor plan, avoiding nurses who might recognize me from my actual unit. The hardest part wasn't the infiltration. It was maintaining a professional distance as I passed the rooms of genuinely sick patients. Children recovering from surgery, elderly people fighting infections, people who had nothing to do with the war being waged around them, but who could become casualties if Kozlov decided that civilian shields weren't enough to protect himself. Leo's room was at the end of a dimly lit hall, guarded by a man who looked more like a bodyguard than a medical orderly. I approached with the confident stride of someone who belonged there, clipboard in hand, a look of bored routine on my face. "Excuse me," I said, my English accented with Spanish. "I need to check the vitals on the patient in 4B. The guard looked me up and down, his eyes lingering on my scrubs, my ID badge, my professional demeanor. "No one goes in without Mr. Kozlov's permission." "Then get it. The man has a heart condition and needs to be monitored every 4 hours. Unless you want to explain to your boss why his leverage died of cardiac arrest." A flicker of uncertainty crossed the guard's eyes. He pulled out his phone and spoke in rapid Russian. While he was distracted, I palmed the syringe I had prepared. It wasn't poison, just a fast-acting sedative that would put him out for a few hours with no permanent damage. "Kozlov says no visitors," the guard said after ending his call. "I'm not a visitor. I'm medical staff." I moved closer, invading his personal space enough to make him shift uncomfortably. "Look, I don't care about your business. I don't want to know why this patient is here, or what you plan to do with him. I just need to make sure he doesn't die before you're done with him." The guard hesitated, his eyes flicking between me and the closed door. That moment of hesitation was all I needed. The needle slid between his ribs before he could react, finding the precise spot that would deliver the maximum effect with minimal harm. He was on the floor in seconds, unconscious but breathing steadily. I dragged him into a supply closet, then used his key card to enter Leo's room. My husband was strapped to the hospital bed, his face bruised from beatings, his eyes dull from whatever drugs they were using to keep him compliant. He looked up as I entered, a flicker of confusion on his face. "Evelyn." His voice was slurred. Why are you here?" "To end this." I moved to his bedside, checking his restraints with professional efficiency. "To make sure Kozlov can never use you again." "Use me?" Leo's eyes struggled to focus. "I don't understand." "I know." I prepared another syringe. This one contained a very different substance. Something I had synthesized from Lorenzo's extensive collection. Something that would stop a heart without leaving an obvious trace. "You never did understand the consequences of your choices." A flicker of recognition crossed Leo's eyes as he saw the needle. "Evelyn, please. I'm your husband. I love you. You sold information on children, Leo. Children I might have treated, whose hands I might have held as they faced surgery." I found a vein in his arm with practiced ease. "You turned my profession into a weapon against the innocent." I was desperate. "I never thought you thought about the easy way out." You thought about making someone else pay for your mistakes. The needle slid in smoothly, just as you've always done. Evelyn, please. Leo's eyes widened as the drug took effect, his body arching against the restraints as his heart began to race, then falter. I watched dispassionately as the man I had married died, feeling nothing but a sense of relief that he could never harm another child. When his heart stopped, I gently closed his eyes and straightened the blanket over him. To anyone who found him later, it would look like a cardiac arrest brought on by stress and poor health. The fire alarm went off right on cue as I left the room. Lorenzo's men had planted charges in the basement of the building, creating enough chaos and an evacuation order to cover my escape. In the confusion of patients being moved and staff executing emergency protocols, a traveling nurse disappearing into the night would go completely unnoticed. I met Lorenzo in a parking lot 6 blocks away, his pale eyes searching my face for signs of trauma or regret. What he found was the calm satisfaction of someone who had finally stopped cleaning up messes and started solving them permanently. "It's over," I said, stripping off the bloody gloves and dropping them into the disposal bag he provided. "Any complications?" "None. Kozlov just lost his primary leverage, and the city just lost a man who endangered children for gambling money." I looked back at the medical facility, where emergency vehicles were arriving to deal with the fire alarm. Justice was served. Lorenzo pulled me into his arms, his strong arms wrapping around me in a gesture of possessive relief. "Welcome to the family business, Evelyn." I tilted my face up to his, finally ready to claim what I wanted, not what I thought I deserved. "It's about time." When he kissed me this time, it wasn't gentle or exploratory. It was a claiming, a possession, a marking of me as his in a way that went beyond protection or circumstance. I responded with equal hunger, finally admitting what I had been denying since that first night in his car. I belonged to Lorenzo Valenti, and I had just proven I was worthy of such a powerful existence. The war was over. My real life was just beginning. 6 months later, I stood in the bathroom of Lorenzo's penthouse, staring at the 2 pink lines on a pregnancy test that would change everything. My hands were shaking as I set the plastic stick on the marble countertop, my mind racing with possibilities I wasn't sure I was ready to face. Outside, the city spread out beneath us like a conquered kingdom. In the months since Victor's extermination, Lorenzo's empire had expanded exponentially. The remnants of the Russian operation had been absorbed or destroyed, their territories redistributed to families willing to acknowledge the supremacy of the Valenti name. What had been a brutal battle for control had become a systematic consolidation of power, and I had been a part of it all. The woman who had gotten into Lorenzo's car 7 months ago would have been horrified by what I had become. That Evelyn had been soft, forgiving, willing to accept the emotional scraps of a life in exchange for the illusion of normalcy. She believed in redemption, in second chances, in the fundamental goodness of people who consistently proved her wrong. Evelyn Valenti was someone else entirely. "Evelyn." Lorenzo's voice came from the bedroom, laced with a contentment I had never heard from him before our wedding 3 months ago. "Rosa wants to know what you'd prefer for dinner tonight." Our wedding. The memory still took my breath away. Not the city hall ceremony I had endured with Leo, but a spectacle that would have rivaled a Renaissance coronation. 500 guests in an Italian cathedral, a wedding dress designed for my body, diamonds that glittered like captured stars. I had walked down an aisle strewn with white roses toward a man who looked at me like I was the answer to a prayer he had never spoken. But it was the reception that truly marked my transformation. When Lorenzo introduced me as La Regina, the Queen, every person in that room had bowed their head in genuine deference. Not because I had married their boss, but because I had proven I deserved the title. "Whatever Rosa thinks is best," I called back, my eyes still fixed on the test stick. 2 pink lines. Positive. Pregnant. With Lorenzo's child. The bathroom door opened, and my husband appeared in the doorway, already dressed for the evening in charcoal slacks and a black shirt that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. 6 months of marriage had only made him more handsome in my eyes, more essential than breathing. His pale eyes went immediately to the test on the counter. For a long moment, his expression was completely blank. Then, something ignited in the depths of those winter sky eyes. Something so intense it made my knees weak. "Evelyn." My name was barely a whisper. "Are you?" "Yes." I turned to face him fully, letting him see the mixture of wonder and fear on my face. "We're having a baby." Lorenzo crossed the bathroom in 2 strides and pulled me into his arms, his hands trembling as he buried his face in my hair, and I could feel the tremor that ran through his powerful frame. He murmured something against my neck. "I'm about 6 weeks, maybe 7. I pulled back, meeting his gaze. Are we ready for this?" Lorenzo's smile was radiant, transforming his face from dangerous to devastatingly beautiful. "I've been ready since the night I found you in my car." The admission made my chest ache with emotion. "Have you? I knew you were different. Special. The kind of woman who could stand beside me, not behind me." His hands moved to my face, cupping it with an almost painful carefulness. "The kind of woman who could give me children worthy of the empire I've built for them. What if they ask how their mother and father met? What we do for a living?" Lorenzo's expression grew thoughtful. "We'll tell them the truth. That sometimes the world is a dangerous place, and protecting the people you love requires making difficult choices. They'll know what we are. They'll know we are their parents, and that everything we do is to ensure they never have to make the same choices we did." Lorenzo's thumbs traced the line of my cheekbones. "They'll know they are loved, fiercely and without limit." The certainty in his voice settled something inside me that I hadn't realized was trembling. This was not how I had pictured becoming a mother married to a man who ran a criminal enterprise, pregnant with a child who would inherit immense wealth and dangerous enemies. But standing in Lorenzo's arms, feeling the strength and protection that radiated from him like heat, I couldn't imagine wanting any other future. "In 2 years," I said suddenly. "What?" I smiled, a sudden, crystal-clear vision of our future flashing before my eyes. "Ask me again in 2 years if I regret any of this. Ask me if I miss the woman who got in your car that night. And what will you tell me? That Evelyn Hayes died in a storm. And that Evelyn Valenti was born from her ashes." I stood on my toes to kiss him, pouring all my love and certainty into the connection. That she was reborn as something infinitely more powerful. 2 years later, I stood in the nursery of our new estate, a sprawling mansion outside the city where our children would have room to run and guards to keep them safe. I held our 6-month-old son in my arms, watching as our 15-month-old daughter toddled across the rug. Lucia had Lorenzo's pale eyes and my stubborn chin. Marco, named for the man who had become family, had my coloring but his father's sharp gaze. Both were perfect, healthy, and blissfully unaware that their parents' love story had begun in violence and been sealed in blood. Lorenzo appeared in the doorway, still in his suit, but his tie was loosened and his sleeves were rolled up. He had been in meetings all day, restructuring our legitimate businesses to provide a cleaner source of income for future generations. The Valenti Foundation now operated a dozen hospitals in 3 states, all providing world-class pediatric care. My professional background had proven invaluable in designing programs that actually helped children, instead of exploiting them. "How was your day?" I asked, passing little Marco into his father's eager arms. "Productive. We acquired a controlling interest in another pharmaceutical company, and the city council approved our proposal for the new children's wing." Lorenzo settled into the rocking chair, holding our son with the gentle expertise he had displayed from the moment of their birth. "And yours?" Lucia took 4 steps without holding on to anything. I scooped up our daughter, who immediately began chattering in the mixture of Italian and English she currently commanded. "I had lunch with Rosa to discuss the charity gala next month. Any problems with security arrangements?" "None. Marcus has it all handled." I studied my husband's face, noting the satisfaction there. "You're pleased about something specific?" "Dmitry Koslov was arrested this morning. Federal trafficking charges. He'll spend the rest of his life in prison." Lorenzo's smile had the sharp edge of old-world vengeance. The last of Victor's lieutenants, finally gone. Good. I felt no guilt for my satisfaction. Koslov had ordered the murders of 3 children during his brief reign as head of the Russian operation. His imprisonment was justice, not cruelty. The children are safer now. All children are safer. Lorenzo looked up at me, his pale eyes filled with a tenderness that still took my breath away, even after all this time. "Do you ever regret it? Any of it?" I sat on the arm of his chair, our little family complete and perfect in this moment. Outside, a team of security guards patrolled the sprawling acres of the estate. Downstairs, Rosa was preparing dinner with ingredients from the organic garden we had installed last spring. And beyond the walls of the estate, a mostly peaceful city thrived under the protection of a man who had learned to turn violence into justice. "I regret nothing," I said, and I meant it. The woman who married Leo wanted safety at any cost. The woman who chose you wanted something worth fighting for. And what was that? I looked at our children. At the man who had given me a love I never thought possible. At the life we had built from the ashes of my former identity. Everything we have now. Lorenzo reached up and cupped my face, his thumb tracing the familiar path along my cheekbone. I love you, Evelyn Valenti. I love you too, Lorenzo Valenti. More than I ever loved the woman I used to be. Later that night, after our children were asleep and the house was quiet, I stood at the window again, looking out over the city we had shaped together. But this time, Lorenzo's arms were around me from behind, his hands resting protectively on my slightly swollen belly where our third child was beginning to grow. What are you thinking about? He whispered against my ear. The storm, I said softly. The night everything changed. Do you ever wish it hadn't happened? I leaned back against his solid warmth, watching the lights of our domain glitter like stars on the ground. I wish it had happened sooner. Lorenzo's laugh rumbled through his chest, vibrating against my back. My bloodthirsty queen. Your bloodthirsty queen, I corrected, turning in his arms to face the man who had changed my life in ways I was still discovering. Always. Always, he agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss that tasted like victory, like vindication. Like a love story that had been worth every dangerous step of the journey to get here. Outside, it began to rain. Not the punishing storm that had driven me into Lorenzo's car, but a gentle rain that would nourish the gardens where our children would play tomorrow. Protected. Cherished. Unbreakable. The woman who had been left crying in a parking lot was gone forever. In her place stood Evelyn Valenti, queen of an empire built on loyalty and love, mother to children who would never know abandonment or betrayal. I was exactly where I was meant to be, and I would never let anyone take it from me again.